I mean, you might think also potentially hapless until that he's taken under the wing of his mentor, whose name has completely gone out of my head. Preston.
Yes,
Preston Holt.
Preston Holt. Yeah.
We're all searching our minds.
Hey guys, welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair, a Global Witcher podcast. My name is Alyssa from Good Morn, and I'll be your host as you, I, and our international Hansa accompany Geralt of Rivia and his destiny, Cyrilla of Sintra, across the continent. This is a wrap on Season 8 of the podcast. Thank you for tuning in as we discussed Andrew Sapkowski's Tower of Swallows and Crossroads of Ravens. Join us on Thursday, July 2nd for all new episodes of Breakfast in Beauclair when we return for Season 9. We have two very special guests on today's episode, Translator David French and narrator Peter Kenny. After you listen to the episode, follow the Breakfast in Beauclair social media channels for more little tidbits and anecdotes from today's guests, including the advice they'd give to Geralt, challenging aspects when working with Sapkowski's writing, translating faithfully or with liberties, their favorite scenes, and times they've been surprised by their own work. Here's a preview of David's favorite scenes from the saga.
I think it's just amazing. And again, it's a very visual cinematic scene is when Ciri kills Rience and his gang on the ice. Sapkowski creates such an amazingly dramatic scene. The way Ciri sort of appears out of the fog and the sense of menace and these hardened killers just fearing for their lives, waiting to see what's going to happen next.
Thank you so much to our patrons for supporting the show and this season of Breakfast in Beauclair. Thanks to our producer-level patrons, Charlotte from Vengberg Glamrai, Louise of Covier, Red Kite, Katie the Redhead of Dusant, Jacob B., John of Riblia, James Carson III, The Original Roach, Tom from Australia, Jill Keith the Tabby Witch, Softy, Miriam, Kitty, Lisa C., Jimmy from the UK, and Sidna. This season would not be possible without all of you. If you would like to learn more about supporting Breakfast in Beauclair, visit patreon.com/breakfastinbeauclair. And of course, as a full wrap on the season, thank you so much to this season's editor, Kayla Buys, who has been just absolutely phenomenal at editing the discussions for this season. I appreciate it so much. As for this episode, we have all-star guests to close out the season. Join us as we discuss the craft and care to bring The Witcher to English-speaking readers and listeners, Polish literary convention versus English prose, historical influences throughout Sapkowski's series, glowing reviews of the Hussite Trilogy, our own Sapkowski stories, the underappreciated weight of silence, and returning to Geralt of Rivia in Crossroads of Ravens. Without further ado, let's get to our discussion. Translator David French and narrator Peter Kenny on translating The Witcher across language and medium.
Hey guys, welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair. My name is Alyssa, and today I have two special guests who will need no introduction. My first guest is a British literary translator living in Poland. He's been translating Andrew Sapkowski's novels into English since 2012, namely the Witcher novels and the Hussite Trilogy. He is currently completing a new translation of Blood of Elves, which will give him the full set of novels featuring Geralt, Ciri, and the gang. Apart from literature, he translates subtitles for TV and film and movie screenplays, and has worked on set as a voice coach with Polish actors. You'll recognize my second guest from their appearance in episode 75, a conversation with Doug Cockle and Peter Kenny. He has an acting career spanning 40 years across stage, audio dramas, animation, corporate websites, video game characters, and narration. After a chance meeting on the tube, he started recording audiobooks for a charity, eventually progressing into recording commercially. To date, he has recorded more than 300 titles for authors including Ian M. Banks, Neil Gaiman, Claire North, Michael Miller, and of course, Andrew Sapkowski. Please welcome David French, the English translator of the Witcher series, and Peter Kenny, the English narrator of the Witcher audiobooks. Hello. Welcome.
Hi, Alyssa. Great to be here.
Yes, so lovely to have you both. David, do you mind telling us how you first became a Polish translator?
Well, as you said, I live in Poland. I've lived in Poland for a long time now, talking decades. And I came as an English teacher, teaching ESL. After I've been living in Poland a certain amount of time, someone came in, because there's this English guy here with a text by the author Gombrowicz, a well-known Polish writer. He was a lecturer somewhere in Sweden, this guy, and he asked me to translate. And I had a go, but the guy rejected it pretty much because my text was full of the word of. Like every sentence had 4 or 5 ofs in, and Polish has a lot of situations where it uses the genitive, and we might come back to that later when we talk about translations. But that was the first thing I was given. It was a bit of a failure. And then someone came in with a tiny little booklet with his own photos and short captions underneath in German and English, and he asked me to translate that. And gradually, I just improved my Polish, was given more and more texts. For example, in Krakow, there's the Wawel Castle, where there's an important museum. And, I did some work for them. I did some work in kind of tourist text, history, this kind of thing. Then a very good friend of mine, in fact, the friend of mine who has the dedication in the front of the book, the Crossroads book. He works in TV, and he asked if I wanted to translate some subtitles for documentaries. And this seemed much more interesting than the things I'd done so far, and it involved a bit of kind of real dialogue and different things like that. Well, it is dialogue, isn't it? And then, it was sort of gradual process of doing more and more complex text. And then I thought, well, why don't I just aim high and go for, literary translation? I got in contact with the Book Institute in Krakow, which promotes Polish literature abroad. They publish catalogues of the new Polish work that comes out every year, new Polish books, they call it. So I made contact with them, and I translated various short texts about authors and excerpts from the novels. So they knew I was around. And then I was told that Andrzej Sapkowski's publishers were looking for a new translator, and would I like to sort of enter myself into like a casting process, like competition for who gets to translate the next ones. And I jumped at the chance. I wasn't I've said this in other places, I wasn't a Sapkowski reader as such, but when I was working as a teacher, teaching in a teacher training college, teaching among other things translation, one of the students brought in a text, a short, maybe a page long or even less, of one of Sapkowski's novels. And I just thought, oh, that would be so awesome to translate that. And that had been a couple of years before this competition that it came up, and I jumped at the chance. And then I submitted my effort and didn't hear from them for getting on for a year. And then suddenly I got an email from the publisher in the UK saying, oh, yeah, we like that. Do you want to start tomorrow? Do you want to start on Monday? Kind of thing. It was pretty much like that. I'd kind of given up hope months before. But yeah, maybe that gives an insight into the publishing process, actually, and the lengths of time. That was 2 books, Time of Contempt and Baptism of Fire. Yeah, so I translated some books, but nothing. It was quite a big jump straight into Sapkowski.
Yeah, I could imagine.
And then it picked up its momentum, as you know, but we'll probably come back to that. So it's quite a long answer anyway. So that's how it happened.
Well, thank you for talking us through it. For listeners who might be unfamiliar with the publication process, how does the original Polish manuscript move through the translation and the audio pipeline?
Up to you, David, to start that one.
I'm invited by the publisher to translate a book. We have to negotiate by when I will submit the manuscript, because they know when the book needs to be published, and then they need to work backwards. And it's a much more complex process than I thought it was in the first place. With Crossroads, it was the shortest period I've ever had, because they wanted to get Crossroads out in all the different languages on the same day. And I had to sort of work pretty quickly to get that one done. But once I've worked out the date that I've been asked to hand it in, I start my work, which is independent work, for quite a few months. I normally take 3 goes at it. I'd sort of do a rough version and then go back to the beginning and go through it again, very carefully checking my English against the original, that I haven't missed anything out. The second run through is already developed into a slightly different
work because I know the full story by then. And then I'll go through the whole thing on a third occasion, reading it out loud as I'm editing it. So I'm hearing the story in my ears and not just through my eyes. And then it gets submitted to the editor who reads my manuscript and then comes back to me with suggestions and changes. And then we agree on those. And then a little bit later, I'm given a production copy, which is a PDF. And visually and graphically, it looks like the page will be. And I go through that version. And at the same time as I'm going through the PDF production version, the proofreaders going through their version as well. And then they get kind of melded together. And then it comes out a few months later. I know the text pretty well by the time it's completed because I've been through it quite a few times.
And Peter, when in that process do you come in? Is it totally at the end, or?
No, they kind of sound me out and say, look, this is we start with an end date, as you see what I mean, and work. It's very similar to David. It's worked backwards, but they need maybe 2 weeks to do the edit after the recording. I think we took 3 days to record Crossroads. I like to have the script at least 2, preferably 3 weeks before I actually record. Even earlier than that, if possible. The earlier you can get the script to me, the better. They aren't the only books I do. I've got lots of other studios asking me to do things, so I'm kind of
very in demand.
I have to make sure that I have, space in my diary. And so I say allow at least 3 weeks before you want me to start recording, because I may have to juggle recording something else in another studio worth doing the prep work on the script, and don't guarantee that those 3 weeks are going to be empty. I'm not going to be working for 3 weeks on preparing the script. If it's 3 days in the studio, it's a minimum of 3 days prep for me. So I do as much time in prepping as I do in the studio, and that's researching pronunciations, making sure I've got character arcs, knowing who's talking to whom, and marking that all up into the script. I get the PDF that's sent to me, and I can write in the margins just using my finger. That's kind of my process. I will do a first read through and preliminary markup, and then I go through again, and this time it's drilling down into detail about mood, about intention. Are they eating? Are they yawning when they're speaking? All that sort of stuff. Picking out, making sure I've got all those details. And then when I'm in the studio the night before, I will skim read the pages I'm going to record the next day, so that I know what I'm doing. I know what I don't go, oh, hang on, it's this bit. Ultimately, it's a massive sight read because you can't remember an entire book. So you're effectively sight reading a book. So any help you can give yourself in advance saves time in the studio and allows for fluency. Like I say, I've been sounded out for the Last Wish, and we shall see what happens. Watch this thing.
Well, exciting. And Peter, for people who may not have heard your original recording with Doug Cockle, could you remind us of your journey to audiobook narration and into The Witcher?
Well, I mean, I've been an actor for, as you said, 40 years. Honestly, you wouldn't think it, would you? No, I've been an actor for 40 years. I worked for the BBC Radio Drama Company. I was in the various productions at the RSC. And did a lot of touring theatre around Europe and the world. In fact, actually, I've been very lucky to go to some amazing places. Anyway, as you said in your intro, after I left the Radio Drama Company back in the early 90s, I was sitting on a train, in a tube train, and I met Matthew Walters, who had been a producer at the BBC. And he'd left the BBC and moved to a charity called Listening Books, who publish books for people with disabilities who can't, for whatever reason, hold a book in the usual way. And so as opposed to the RNIB, which is specifically for people with other issues with their sight. And they didn't pay anything. He said, I can only pay your expenses. I said, no, I don't care. That sounds great. I'd love to do that. And so I started doing bits and pieces for that. And then one thing led to another. And my first kind of big commercial break, I suppose, it's interesting you saying about, David, you're saying about the long times waiting to hear back in the publishing industry. I was approached by a producer and I'd worked with at one of the charities, because I'd gone to work for several charities by then, had moved to a publishing company called Strathmore in London, who are very prolific audiobook producers. And he'd said, oh, there was this guy I used to work with at the charity who's really good, you should get him in. And so they contacted me and said, we're casting a voice for a young adult sort of pirates in space thing. Would you be interested? I said, yeah, okay. And they said, send us some samples of your work. And I didn't have a home studio or anything at this stage. I just had a little mini disc and things. Actually, this is how long ago it was, a mini disc. I recorded some bits of Ian Banks because I'd recorded Ian Banks for the RNIB. I'd recorded the Wasp Factory and a version of Look to Windward. So I thought, oh, that Ian Banks would do some bits from that would be good. So I sent it off, and I didn't hear anything back. So I went, oh well, you spread your bread on the waters. It was nice that they asked, but I never heard another thing about it. And then about 9 months later, I was in France, up an Alp, just about to slide down the side of it, when my phone rang, and this very, very cultivated voice said, "Hello, is that Peter Kenny?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Hello." And it was the head of the studio at Strathmore, and he said, "Would you like to record the next Ian Banks novel without the M? It's his latest book. He hasn't published a book for about 8 years. Would you be interested?" And I went, "Yeah, oh my God, yeah." So that was The Steep Approach to Garberdale, and that was the start of my journey with Ian Banks and Ian M. Banks subsequently, the sci-fi. And then one thing led to another, and I did various. I did all. I mean, I read all genres, and then when Denizia Stock did the first translations of the first two Witcher books, they contacted me and said, "Would you be interested in recording these?" And I said, "Yeah." I knew nothing about it, and at that point, they said, "There is a game, but please don't access it because the books are standalone. They're nothing to do with the game. Do your own thing." So okay, so I did. Which is why I think for some people who are very deep into the lore, there are discrepancies between my pronunciations and the pronunciations that are in the game. But anyway, that was that. So that was kind of how I got to Sapkowski, and then subsequently, of course, David, he took over the translations, and then having done all the Witcher books at that stage, we did the Hussite Trilogy, which I actually prefer. I have to say, I know that's dare I say it, but it's kind of real world magical realism, I suppose, because it takes place against the background of real world events, and it doesn't pull any punches. It's quite dark, the Hussite Trilogy, but it's also very funny, and it's picaresque. We've got a central character, Renovan, who is charming and hapless in the first book. He slowly, a bit like in some respects Geralt's development, he goes from being callow youth to being an extremely experienced warrior in the pursuit of honesty and justice against dark forces that are working in the background. Because although it's set in the real world, there is magic, and magic works, and mysticism and spirituality have great power and strength. So it kind of takes the idea of the fantasy magic world and merges it with real world events. And they're just three colossal books. I mean, they're huge books anyway, but the pace of the writing and the strength of the characters and the wit, that's the thing about Hergé's writing and your translations, David, the wit. That's what works for why I love the book so much, because they're erudite and they're funny and they're deeply moving, and it's earned. It's not sort of just plonked in. You really connect with the characters, and when they hurt, you hurt, which is good writing.
It's cool. I think I quite possibly prefer the Hussite Trilogy as well. I mean, the fact that I live in Poland and the events mainly take place in this area called Silesia, which I actually live in, and part of it is present-day Czech Republic, and these the place names all exist, and these are historical characters from Polish history, sort of woven into the story. That's part of it that I really enjoy.
You may recoil at this analogy, I don't know, but for those who want a kind of an idea of it, think of Till Eulenspiegel, but so much larger and so much more crazy and frenetic and world-spanning in terms of the journey that Renovan takes and his travels across the whole region. In some respects, you come back to Geralt, and that's what's so wonderful about Crossroads of Ravens. I don't know if I'm jumping into this too early, Alyssa, but you get to see how the man developed, because at the beginning of the book, he's quite callow. You see the beginnings of the man that he's going to become, and the development of his personal moral code, and the fact that he actually is a man of deep feeling. He's not just a grunt. He's not just some, mercenary hire sword who kind of blindly kills things. That's one of the things I love about, again, coming back to the writing. You're not hit over the head with it. It might seem minor, but actually it's all there. It's all there, and it's very layered in and layered in and layered in. And as the book progresses, you sort of see who he's going to be by the time we reach him in Last Wish.
And also his readiness to lay his life on the line for someone he loves.
Yeah.
And he's courageous and fearless at such a young age.
You might think also potentially hapless until that he's taken under the wing of his mentor.
It's a tough apprenticeship he's pushed through, isn't it? I mean, he's thrown down a mine and has to take on the bloodthirsty sort of dog-headed monsters. That's his first taste, isn't it, of being a Witcher.
On the subject of Crossroads of Ravens, I was actually curious about, one, what it was like to return to the world of The Witcher, like, a decade after you both started working on it. And also, were you as readers kind of surprised as to where Sapkowski took the prequel?
There weren't any surprises. Obviously, he knows his own writing and he knows where he went with Geralt in the later stories. That actually, to extrapolate it back, you could argue he might have wanted to go into more detail about Kaer Morhen, but then that's not his interest. Actually, it's very much based in real world experience, and that is anybody who's done further education or been to university or college or study, be it to be an engineer or be a carpenter or whatever. Anybody who's trained in anything knows that you learn more in the first 3 months actually out doing the job than you do in the 3 years you spent studying it. And I know that was true of my career and my work as an actor and working in theatre and radio and so on. That actually, by doing the job, I learned far more. I mean, I had great tutors. I learned, I was taught very well and given opportunities to explore and practice in the safety of a university environment or a college environment. But actually, when you get out there in the real world and start doing it, and that it becomes very clear because, as I say, he starts out at the beginning of the book quite sort of idealistic, I think, but slowly kind of hard lessons are taught, and the hypocrisy and harshness of the world is, there are no punches pulled with that in his experience. And so he grows and he becomes a more rounded human being. And you can, as I say, see him develop. So I suppose in that respect, going back to the books from after a gap, it wasn't a surprise where he went. It was actually just nice to know, I suppose.
David, and you?
In your question, it was about returning to The Witcher after a break. As it happened, I was in the middle of translating The Last Wish when I was asked to start on Crossroads. I'm currently doing new translations of The Last Wish and Blood of Elves. The part I'd been translating in The Last Wish was when Geralt is having this sort of one-way conversation with Iola, trainee priestess, and she doesn't speak. So it's kind of a monologue, but it's supposed to be a conversation. And he tells her what or who was the first monster he killed after leaving Kaer Morhen. And that is the scene that I jumped into as I began Crossroads. So that was quite cool for me, the sort of the chronology of how it works. So I was actually in the middle of it and I put aside The Last Wish to dive into Crossroads. Yeah, so it was a bit strange going from the kind of the mature, wizened, well, slightly wizened, but anyway, battle-hardened Geralt to this young lad who'd got the physical skill, but had not been tested in the fire. Yeah, and makes a lot of errors, sort of youthful errors. He wanted to make an impression, didn't he, in his first interaction? He misjudged it badly, didn't he? Because he reinterprets the word monster. In fact, what I was amazed of is how many bloody interactions there are with humans in that book.
Yeah. David, there was something I was curious about. You spoke about, coming back to The Witcher after this gap. It's kind of curious that Sapkowski has effectively done the reverse. There's a 40-year gap between when he first wrote The Witcher and then Crossroads of Ravens, and his protagonist is younger in that time as well. As a translator, I think the contrast of doing The Last Wish and Crossroads of Ravens together is so interesting. Did you notice any particular shift in his writing style in Polish as you're looking at the two source materials side by side? Does that influence how you translate the English version as well?
I'm not even sure if I can articulate it very well in English. I felt the same with Season of Storms, obviously, which was written. You probably know the details. How much longer after the saga was that written, roughly? Do you know, is it about 8 years or 10 or more?
More, 14. So Lady of the Lake came out in 1999, Season of Storms in 2013 in Polish.
I think on a very intuitive level, I felt Season of Storms was slightly different, as was Crossroads. But I'm not even sure I'm going to be able to articulate why. I mean, at a gut level, it felt different. It didn't. They were both very gory in their own way, but I felt that the saga stuff was nastier. That's not the Polish, but I think they were nastier and darker, the saga. So it suggests to me that a book can be gory and vicious, but not necessarily dark. Yeah, they seem more like adventures involving Geralt than him and the other characters moving through a really dark place with a great deal at stake.
My perspective as narrating those, I mean, you've crystallized something for me there, which I kind of was sort of aware of, but hadn't really thought about in this detail. But the Geralt of Last Wish and Season of Storms hasn't got the brooding responsibility that he feels for Ciri. He's a lighter person for it. And so the adventures in those two books are, while they're still gory and bloody, you're less aware of his internal self-doubt and concern and worry, and that does underscore the saga very much. So they are darker because the stakes are higher, I think.
And I think the episodic nature of both compilations of short stories feels really familiar in Crossroads of Ravens as well. Comparatively, I think most of the books have like 7 to 11 chapters, and Crossroads of Ravens was like 24. So like it felt very different, structurally as a reader, which I was really surprised by when I opened up the book. I was like, what do you mean there's like 30 chapters in here? But they're all kind of like little short and they feel like vignettes. It's differently paced, but I think structurally calls back to his origins, writing short stories and that flash fiction.
There's a lot of those letters, isn't there, going backwards and forwards between various characters, as if whatever he's doing, he's got CCTV's cameras, filming every step he takes almost. Yeah. Do you remember that ancient film Jason of the Argonaut from like the 60s?
Yes, yeah.
I don't know if it was Ray Harryhausen, because every now and again you go up to Olympus and the gods are watching what's going on down below and commenting on it, kind of thing. And Andre loves spies. There's nothing he likes more than spies and Secret Service, is there? Everything's being followed. Even when you think it was a sort of harmless campfire, maybe at, what's the name of Holt's place again?
Oh, I can't remember the name of the house, but yes.
Where he stays? Yes. Even there, someone was watching it and is reporting back on what his next moves are, basically, yeah.
I think de Cunha, who's the spy master, he prefigures Dijkstra, doesn't he? The guy who's got his finger in every web. It's very interesting. When I first read it, I was confused by de Cunha's personality, because the way his attempted abduction in the forest, when Geralt first meets him in Crossroads, I thought perhaps he was quite a sinister character. But then as it turns out, he's actually morally ambiguous, but basically he's the state, but he's actually looking out for Geralt as opposed to looking for him, if you see what I mean.
He appears to make his final decision. It's in the Storfor's prison where he lets Geralt go.
That's right, yeah.
He's made a moral decision which maybe his overseers wouldn't have approved or wouldn't necessarily know about.
He reads between the lines and he can see that what Geralt is doing is actually on the morally good side, and that actually, in fact, the world is a better place for him in it. He sees that, but says, "Don't come before me again, because then I won't have any choice but to, execute you or throw you into Storfor forever."
Yeah, the way Peter's talking about it reminds me of the fact that Andrzej grew up in communist Poland. We mentioned spies and secret services. That was a big part of reality in the communist system in Poland. I actually moved to Poland to teach just in the last 2 years before the Berlin Wall came down. So I kind of saw a little bit of it. And they obviously had censors, every work of, literature or film, music, I guess, would have to go through the censor. And I remember hearing a story where a writer was surprised that a censor had allowed a few things through in his book, which were very satirical. I can't remember the details, but, there'd be some sort of attacks on the regime or they'd be poking fun at it. And he asked the censor why he'd left it in. And the censor kind of said, well, I mean, they're just too intellectual. Most readers won't even catch that. So, we can let that one go through. It's no risk to the regime. So, I mean, I'm just saying that because individual people might have made their own decisions in that apparatus in the same way describing about Cunha.
Yeah. I'd be interested to also speak about the references that like you find as you're translating Sapkowski's work. But before we get to that, Peter, you're talking about like the earnestness of like a young Geralt. And I think both in his actions as well as in his like internal monologue. How did it feel both revisiting Geralt as a character, but also like adapting like a new, younger, fresher voice to someone that you like have embodied so deeply?
Yeah, the obvious things like his voice would be lighter, it wouldn't have so much gravel in it. He would probably speak a little quicker, and I wanted to avoid him getting too whiny. But there is that thing that comes across in with very earnest, idealistic people. They can make it, no, but that's not fair. I mean, and that in itself, you automatically heard how my voice went up.
Hmm.
And it does. The truth of what he's saying. I mean, as with all these things, whenever you're doing any voices or characters or whatever, it's the truth of it. It's the truth of what they're saying and the sincerity behind it. And that's what you play with as a narrator. Unless there's a deliberate subterfuge going on, but which the listener wouldn't know.
Hmm.
But I, as a narrator, would know because I've read ahead and I know that actually this is a bit of duplicity. So there are ways of playing with that without spoiling. You don't want to give it away so the listener kind of goes, oh, hang on a minute. Oh, I see what's coming. You don't want to blow it because it's the author's reveal, not the narrator's reveal.
Mm.
It was just basically thinking back to how, the Geralt of the later books with his long, his deep, heavy, that the accent. By the way, people ask about the accent. It's I call it Lancune Yorkish.
Yeah, on your previous appearance, you talked about traveling the north.
Exactly. I didn't want people to go, oh, he's from Oldham. It's a mix of Lancashire, Yorkshire, Mancunian, and Scouse. Basically, is what I use for Geralt's voice, which is kind of the area I live in and the area I move. So there are certain moments, particularly when he's talking to Dandelion, where he's really Scouse. Just goes, Dandelion, but just shut the fuck up. And that's so Scouse. There's something about
I've just killed a manticore.
Yeah.
The Beatles are here.
It wouldn't work if you did it entirely Scouse or entirely Mancunian or entirely Yorkshire.
Mm.
So that's why I kind of aim for this slightly nebulous Pennine, I suppose, maybe would be if you're familiar with British geography.
David, one of the things that you mentioned was how even a little interaction in Crossroads of Ravens could be reminiscent of like communist Poland and some of the intelligence networks that were there. Sapkowski's work is like really famously littered with references to real world history, mythology, other literature. What has been like the most niche reference that you've kind of like unearthed in Sapkowski's work?
I niche corrected him the other day.
Did you?
Which I was quite pleased about. Do we get birds whizzing round steeples in Crossroads a couple of times? We were in an urban environment, and there were birds whizzing round church steeples, and it was swallows. And I said, Andre, you know what? If it's an urban environment, they're going to be swifts. They're not going to be swallows. He accepted that one. So that was me being a nerdy ornithologist. But I'm not sure that's quite what you mean.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating because I have such a wide variety of guests, a lot of which are from Europe, or a historian, or I do have a guest who comes on every once in a while who is a falconer. And the things that they bring to the discussion of like, oh, this is like the exact military campaign that happened in like 1948 and like with this false flag campaign, or this specific bird is something that's really important because it means X, Y, and Z as a symbol. That's one of the most fulfilling parts of the podcast for me is I can read the book as, a layperson and have all of these things kind of revealed to me, through the eyes of like listeners.
That leads me to something that's a conversation David and I had a couple of months back. In fact, it was just before I was about to start recording Crossroads, because I was asking David just for clarification on a few points. I don't know if you remember this, David, but in the course of my research, when I'm researching pronunciations and so on, particularly when it comes to the names of characters, I discovered this whilst working on the Hussite Trilogy at first, and I started to pay more attention to it when I came back to Crossroads. And that is, he often mixes up cultures when he chooses the names of characters. He'll have a name that's half French, half Spanish, or half Polish and half Portuguese. The only one that really springs to mind is I can't remember the actual name in the book, but it's the character is the old hag who basically is behind the plot to murder President Holt. She's got this fantastic double-barreled aristocratic name, and what the name actually meant was a hunchback, skinny, scrawny dog, or hunchback, scrawny bitch, basically, which kind of is a description of her. So it became a character note for me. It's like, well, he's playing with us. So actually, I would challenge you to go back and revisit some of the names of characters and try and put them into Forvo or one of the Google Translate things and see what language it comes up in and see what that word means in that language. Because I was astounded. I just got so much more character information just by translating the names. I don't think it's accidental. I'm sure it's deliberate.
Alyssa, I was thinking also that when Andrzej's in a subject area, like he sort of pushes down into the niche as far as he can go, but in many different areas. So that's, I think, why it's hard to put your finger on.
Do you have an example of one?
Or it's hard for me at the moment to put my finger on. I love the way he likes to be an expert, whether he's talking about brewing or bread baking or architecture or clothing or agricultural tools. Yeah, that's why it's so fascinating for me to find out this primitive plough, which I think is called the ard, which I never heard of before. And then there was a niche which won't be a niche for Poles so much, but that is the tree beekeepers. I mean, I love that section to find out that there's a kind of hive where the makers have to climb 3 or 4 meters up a pine tree, carve out a hole in the tree and allow the bees to settle in there, and then protect it from bears by creating kind of structures which stop bears climbing over them. And then the more I read about it, I found out what an important resource honey was, and that the tree beekeepers each had their own sign, like various trades have a sign so you knew who the tree belonged to. The penalty for stealing honey from one of these hives could be having your hand chopped off, I believe. That was fascinating for me to learn about this sort of Central European, completely different mode of keeping bees. What do? You shepherd honey, or you don't
a bee herder?
You don't produce it, do you? Harvest the honey.
Yeah. Something that you just teased, Peter, that I want to ask about. You mentioned that you went to David with some questions about Crossroads of Ravens. What is your working relationship like as you're working on the new books in particular? It sounds like it might have been a bit of a waterfall to start. David does the translations, then you do the audiobooks, Peter. But what has changed, if anything, with these new books, and how do you work together?
We sort of met through social media, really. We've never introduced formally at a studio or anything like that. In the early days, when I was working on the books, I would pass questions back to Andrzej via the publisher. But it just made sense. So when I was working on Crossroads, I said and I actually had the Hussite Trilogy as well. I said, look, I'm in touch with David French on social media. Is it okay if I go to him directly and ask questions? And they went, as long as he's okay with that, then that's fine. And so I think that's sort of how we worked, isn't it? That's my memory of it.
No, that's pretty much it. And there was something, Alyssa, on I think it was Crossroads, quite late on in the process, I was sent probably an Excel file from the publisher with a few dozen names, which were character names, maybe place names, which were supposed to be to help Peter Kenny, who would be recording the book. And I kind of went through them and was ready to be able to record the pronunciation or whatever. But by the time we got through to Peter, he'd done research on every single name already, and he knew exactly how every single thing was going to be translated. Didn't need any help on any of them at all.
I'm a bit of a nerd that way myself, yeah.
So, David, you've spoken on previous interviews about kind of having to be a writer in addition to a translator, because ultimately for English readers, it is your words that they're ultimately reading on the page. What is it like also having that added experience of the audiobooks when you've heard something spoken, you're like, oh, interesting, or like there's something there that brings out another side of the work for you?
I mean, it totally brings out another side. It's a very pleasurable experience because it comes alive. If I'm reading a book to children, I'm going to use accents, but I don't use accents in my head if I'm reading to myself. I love the extra dimensions of the audio. I mean, it's like really exciting. It's like a different medium. It stops being a book somehow. I mean, it becomes a story and storytelling, and all that lovely long tradition of, the oral tradition of reading stories aloud. Yeah.
Yeah. What always delighted me about Peter's work, like everything, and more specifically, the singing was what always got me because I was never expecting it, elevated the medium even more.
Something that people don't allow for necessarily when they're reading a book in their heads, which you can only achieve in audio, is silence. This is part of the writing. This comes out of the writing. This is not me adding anything. This is me using my actor's chops to recognize the truth of a moment between two characters who are speaking. And sometimes there is silence. And the use of that silence and the weight of that silence is in the writing. It's there. It's just you can't hear it and you can't see it on the page, but it is implicit by the nature of the conversation. And so I think that is the sort of thing that enhances the audio that you won't necessarily get from reading the book in your head. I mean, maybe some people do have the full drama playing in their head. I don't know. I mean, I guess I do. I mean, that's how I approach it. I mean, I cast the characters. I think, I have very distinct personalities in my head, and I kind of go, well, okay, if I were being that person, how would I feel about hearing those words from that person? And what's my response to that? And what is it in? Is it astonishment? Is it how fucking dare you? Or whatever it is. But I get that from the writing. So the writing directs me, if you like.
Yeah, because you spoke on the previous episode with Doug Cockle about you don't actually have a director in the traditional sense. You said it's the producers, the audio engineers, and you in the book. I think that's also really fascinating that the book is inherently your director. And as you said, it's your Bible for the course of the production. So
yeah, exactly. I'm only as good as the writing. I just do what I do, and the writing shows me where to go. So
yeah, no pressure, David.
I was going to say to Peter, because there's quite a lot of silence. So-and-so said nothing, so-and-so, or there was quite a long pause, there was a long silence, there was a short silence. There's a lot of that in Andrew, actually, isn't there? So do you sense that when I say that it comes up a lot?
Yeah, I think he does. And I think that's the power of his observation. I mean, and also, I mean, we go back to the skills of the interrogator and the spy is to notice and pick up the tells, to pick up the clues that, when someone doesn't speak is as insignificant as when they do.
Yeah.
He plays with that and uses it to great effect. To not observe it in the audio is to throw away some of the more powerful weapons you've got in the arsenal.
I find it interesting that the inverse is also true of his work. We spoke about, there are sometimes pages or full chapters of pure dialogue without any sort of addendums or identifiers or adjectives or anything that will really direct you in that sense, Peter. And I assume that at that point it just becomes effectively just a script and an exercise in subtext.
Absolutely. What is the agenda here? And whose agenda are we listening to? Who is not saying what they're saying? Good writing does that. It tells you.
Yeah.
You can work out the thread of a conversation. Another author whose work I did a lot of in M. Banks, there'll be sometimes 8 or 9 pages where two characters suddenly start speaking and you have no idea who they are, what gender, what species, what, because they could be aliens, they could be goodness knows what. They just start speaking to each other. Or maybe it's a 3-way. And he would eventually give you a clue and you had to watch out for them. I would then have to extrapolate it back and kind of go, okay, so that's the thread of that argument. So that must be that person speaking. That's the thread of that argument. So that must be her. And that must be the alien or the drone or whatever it is. And I had to do the back work it. Mm. And Andrzej does that to some extent. He doesn't do it quite as much as that. Usually it's fairly clear who's speaking to whom. Occasionally you'd have to kind of go, well, hang on a second, we're coming halfway through a conversation, who is saying this? And I have to go through, work through and wait, okay, that's that person, that's this person, and make sure I'm clear so that when the listeners hear it, if they're not following the text, because some people do, they know who's talking to whom.
Sometimes me and the editors lose our way. So it's not entirely clear if that was deliberate or not.
Yeah.
Because I would get a note back saying, I'm not entirely sure, is that so? is that Geralt, or has he stopped now? And yeah, sometimes we have to tinker a little to make it clearer, to make it unambiguous, not to leave it ambiguous. Yeah.
All it's going to add to that is that what helps hugely for narrators is if you get rid of the he said, she said, because it's quite, by the time we've done our preparation, it's quite clear. Obviously, you need one or two just to guide them.
You've got the voices, though, haven't you? So we know exactly who's speaking.
Yeah, hopefully.
You read everything, though, don't you, Peter? You're not allowed to take anything out.
I'm not allowed to edit out he said, she said. And a letter author is a real bugbear, because you sometimes, at the end of every single line, and you kind of go, really, listeners go nuts having to listen to he said, she said.
Yeah. I was actually thinking, Alyssa, your question was, you aren't directed as such, Peter. And you could direct that question to me as well, because in a way, couldn't you? Because it's kind of, to some extent, an interpretation, and my kind of sense of what's happening and what images I want to put on the page, and like the registers of the speech, depending on which character's speaking. So that is my kind of feel of me being true to the spirit of Andrzej and his storytelling.
So you both have talked about working on multiple Sapkowski's works, The Witcher, the Hussite Trilogy. For both of you, Sapkowski's work is part of a broader portfolio. What are some of the distinguishing qualities of like his material when compared to some of the other projects you work on? What makes it distinctly like Sapkowski-esque?
I'll let you handle that one while I think about it.
Yeah, I mean, one is my classic test on my Polish friends. I mainly translate in an office among other people. You know, I'll try out a sentence on 4 or 5 educated, well-read Polish people who are around in the other offices, and they almost never can answer the question of what that sentence means, because their vocabulary is not broad enough to handle what Andrzej's saying. That's really common experience, that an average well-educated Polish person, there'll be a lot of stuff that they wouldn't understand without a dictionary in a Sapkowski novel.
Yeah, interesting. I think one of the biggest gaps in my understanding, so I hear from, Polish friends, from Czech friends, they're just like, like the English, not a knock on your work, David, just like there's something about the limitations of English that my Polish and Czech friends find very frustrating. I've never been able to understand what exactly it is they mean by that. Is it the poetry? Is it the idioms? What is it about either Polish in general or Sapkowski's work that's sometimes so difficult?
I was just going to ask David, is there a kind of Polish equivalent of Hochdeutsch, where it's a heightened version of the language which is used purely for poetic purposes?
Yeah, I know what you mean. No, I mean, there's a kind of Polish called Sapko Polish, which does that job, yeah.
Named after Andrzej, or?
No, I've just made that up, yeah. I mean, if there is an equivalent, it's what he does, possibly. You can probably furnish this for me. If the Polish people could send me a few sentences or sections to give the precise places where they felt that was happening. I mean, it's funny, right? Because I think you might have even said that in one of the things you wrote or something. Let's say, that, they might well come up with the examples. Simultaneously, Andrzej does use quite a lot of the same words often, and I really try hard not to keep using the same ones, because in English style it would be really dull if we only had the word huge every single time. Andrzej might use the same Polish adjective repeatedly. I mean, he uses the word beautiful. I mean, what the Polish adjective which most commonly is translated as beautiful. If I use beautiful every single time, it would be really pedestrian. Yeah. So I think it operates on different levels, that when Polish kids are learning Polish in school, if they're writing a kind of dissertation, like essay, whatever essays are called these days, assignment or something, to maintain good style in Polish, you can't use the same noun a second time exactly as you did the first time. By which I mean, if you said there was a doctor, if you said doctor again, you'd be corrected by your teacher, because you'd have to say physician, then you'd have to say medic, then you'd have to say surgeon.
That's so interesting.
Not endlessly, but you're not supposed to repeat the same noun. Whereas for an English ear, if you'd seen the word doctor and you know, this character's a doctor, and then you see the word physician, if you came across that in an English text, it might be confusing.
We're more used to adjectives being synonyms.
He's consistently interesting. David's alluded to this, that the level of his knowledge on, textiles and eye for detail, and not obsessively, but enough to be interesting, so that you
Yeah.
you can see the interior of the house. You can smell the spilt food remains in the inns. You can smell the abattoir. He gives you enough detail that there is an all-rounded olfactory, audio, visual sense of where you are, and that it's not unique to him, but his particular use of it is very, very powerful. And I think that's why Project Red leapt on the books when they first came out, because he has created this wonderfully visual, three-dimensional world that it's incredibly deft. It's not easy to do. I know, because
Yeah.
I've worked with a lot of authors, and they, with varying degrees of brilliance. I'm not an author, so I can't.
That's not how I was expecting that sentence to end. Okay, so varying degrees of brilliance, and
I'm not an author, so I have absolutely not a leg to stand on when it comes to talking about writing. But you can be obsessive and slavish with detail to the point where people, is any actually good action going to happen? Okay, so the throne's covered in precious gems and gilded with silver and mithril, and there are 500 steps up to it, and there are 28 guards, and they've all got you. Do you know what I mean? There are ways and ways of doing it.
Yeah.
And what Ange does is that he doesn't smear you with the detail right at the start. He drops it in and then gives a bit of action, and then another bit of detail, and another bit of detail. So the world is built up gradually until it's caked in mud. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of, he doesn't just chuck the mud in the first 2 sentences. That's the sign of quality writing. Anyone who's met Ange knows that he's not necessarily always the easiest of people to talk to. He's charming, but he can also be ferocious. But he has great compassion, and that comes across in the writing. And the way in which he treats, particularly oddly enough, I've been quite surprised occasionally. People have accused him of sexism and so on. And actual fact, he treats women with great respect.
Yes.
He makes them powerful and vulnerable, and all of the, he doesn't make them one thing or the other. He makes them rounded. He makes them real. Oddly enough, the hag character I mentioned earlier, what happens to her and who she is? She's utterly foul, but something got her there. I was reminded of David, I don't know if you remember this character, but from the Hussite Trilogy, I think it's in the second book, The Tower of Fools. Is that the second book? I can't remember. They're in a castle with a bunch of robber barons, and there's this old dowager there who sits and everybody ignores, and she's got no teeth, and she's in her 80s, and she's smelly, and she's revolting. And our main character, our 3 main characters, sit up with her one night, and she just starts talking. And she has the most powerfully moving story of her life. That, as a young woman, she was a great, great beauty and was sought by all the crowned heads of Europe. How on earth did this woman get to this place where she is now this kind of forgotten, toothless crone who everybody kicks and spits at? And yet she's gone from being, potentially the queen of Europe. And it's just heartbreakingly beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful passages in his writing. And I recommend people, read the books by all means, or listen to them, whichever. And I never lose that in Ange's writing. Nothing happens for nothing. I know that these characters have got much more depth, and he's done an awful lot of the work for me.
Yeah.
And so I don't have to, kind of magic up some ridiculous thing, character or whatever, because he's given me the clues. They're already there, I can't remember which one of the books it is, but it's in the book. It's the one where Bernard is the main protagonist.
Likely Tower of Swallows. Yeah.
That's it. He makes her fight in the gladiatorial ring in this horrible little backcountry town, and there's an incredibly corrupt mayor and all these extraordinary characters who populate that. Again, some terrifying women in there as well.
Yeah.
And each of the characters is a thumbnail, beautifully drawn, like a miniature.
Yeah.
And so my job is made incredibly easy by the writing.
Yeah.
That's what I look forward to in a Sapkowski novel.
Yeah. There's something so fascinating, I think, that happens presumably between Sapkowski and the reader, where when I speak to listeners from all around the world, it's always like, wow, this is such like a beautiful, like character-driven story. And then when you talk to Sapkowski himself, he's just like, no, the characters serve the plot. This is only ever about the plot. If I don't have anything to say, I don't have anything to say about the characters beyond what the plot needs them to do.
And yet he still gives you the detail. I don't know if you've ever been to the V&A Museum in London.
Yes, I have. Once in 2018. But
There's a section of miniature portraits which were painted from about the 15th century through up to the early 19th century. And they are jewels, but they literally are jewels. And on the back of them, there are incredibly ornate, the sapphires, pearls, rubies, diamonds, filigree work, whatever. And there is this portrait, but it is, which is full of detail. Well, he may say that the characters serve the plot, but he doesn't do any disservice to his characters because we know who they are.
Yeah.
And that takes care.
David, I'm curious your thoughts on that like gap, and if you perceive that as a translator and as like a Polish reader or not, and like I guess where you side in that kind of argument.
I've taken part in 2 Q&As with Andrzej. I've been the person asking the question. And the first time I did it a few years ago, I don't know, it was like 7 or 8 years ago coming, I asked how emotionally involved he is with the characters. And he said he was like, not in any way emotionally attached to any of the characters. And I didn't believe him. And then when I interviewed him now in Brighton a couple of months ago, I sort of went back to that. And I said how a couple of times a tear had come to my eyes when a character had died. And he he lifted his eyebrow and said, which character in particular? And Andrew said, yeah, good, yeah, fair enough, fine. But he didn't admit to personally being emotionally affected by the character. But yeah, I don't know why he says that really, because one of the things I most enjoy about, interacting with Andrzej's stories is the characters. And I've said quite a few times in other places, not necessarily the main characters who have the bold, dramatic sweeps of their behavior, but smaller parts who appear for a shorter period, they're minor characters. In Polish, the main character is called the first plane character, and you have second plane characters, third plane. And in Polish terms, some of these characters would be really small minor characters, but are fascinating and show some sort of real human side or some beautiful qualities in some sort of interaction or some sacrifice or some courage or...
Yeah, the lady who's laid the curse in Crossroads.
Oh, yeah. I always come back to Applegat, the royal messenger who inadvertently starts the Second Nilfgaardian War, because he never delivers the message to hold the troops. So
that's right.
Yeah, I love his chapter.
When he comes up to the roadblock because there's a monster up ahead, do you remember that scene?
Yes, yeah.
That was what I had to translate when I was chosen to be the translator. It was that section.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't believe Andrzej fully. I think he plays with us a bit.
I've told this story on the podcast before, but I went to Luca Comics and Games Festival in 2019. This was Halloween weekend, 2019. So before the Netflix series had come out, but after I'd read the books, after the podcast had already started. And there was a Q&A with Sapkowski. He started the Q&A by rejecting his Italian translator entirely and said, I don't need you, and then proceeded to do the entire Q&A in English. But I did get the chance to ask him a question, and I had been so nervously, my heart was palpitating. And I just asked him the short question about I admire the dialogue in your work so much, it's beautiful, whatever. How do you go about crafting a scene with so much fulfilling dialogue and well-rounded characters? And he sat there for a moment and he just said, I don't know. I really don't know. And then that was just the end of my time. That was the end of that Q&A.
I think there was on the one time I interviewed him at Comic-Con in London, that a very similar question came up.
Yeah.
And his response was, because I am a genius.
Yeah.
And that was it. He just fell back on that answer anytime he couldn't be bothered to answer a question thereafter.
So, David, you alluded to this as we've been speaking, but in February 2025, the US and UK publishers announced that we'll be expecting new translations of The Last Wish and Blood of Elves in 2026 and 2027. So what can you tease for fans about these new translations?
It was put to me whether I would like to translate those two books, which were initially translated by Danusha Stock something like 7 or 8 years ago. And I was interested, but Gollancz didn't come up with a firm offer until relatively recently. So I began translating The Last Wish, I think last year. And then in the middle of it, had to put it aside for the Crossroads because there was a big push for the translation in all 19 languages to come out on the identical date, which was, towards the end of September, probably. Then I resumed The Last Wish, and I'm working on Blood of Elves. It was important for me, actually, to make the book as much my own as possible because, of course, a lot of the languages entered Witcher lore because they came out so long ago and certain character names are well known in the other media.
Mm-hmm.
To me, part of the creative process was to be allowed to come up with my own names of characters. I'm not talking about the major characters, they're much more like minor characters. And also, I came up with new versions of quite a few of the monsters, which again might only show up like 2 or 3 times in the book.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was important to me to be, allowed to have my versions of things like characters, names of some plants and some monsters. For me, it means quite a lot to think I've been given the opportunity to translate all of the Witcher books.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope the readers are going to enjoy my versions of them because from now on, anyone who bought the original version can have Danusha's on their bookshelf and mine opposite, and obviously people can then compare, and I'll leave it up to them to make their own decisions.
I'm both excited and terrified for that day because I'm quickly running out of space. I think I've hit peak, just the peak amount of Witcher things in my house. But I'm really excited to have like a nice complete set of like your work for sure. As we close down our conversation, one last question. If Breakfast in Beauclair listeners love The Witcher, what else would you recommend they read, watch, or listen to next?
Well, for me, I would say Michael Miller, Songs of Chaos series. They're all fantastic, always worth reading. The Hussite Trilogy, absolutely. If you haven't read the Hussite Trilogy, read it. It is brilliant. And it's very different from The Witcher. Don't expect The Witcher. It's not. It's very, very different. But it's witty, it's brilliant. The level of detail into medieval society and politics and music and literature is just phenomenal and was a sheer delight for me. I used to be a choral scholar, so I got to sing all this fantastic plain chant and everything. I had the actual music. I was able to research the chants and go back to the graduale and so sing what monks were singing in the 14th century. So it was great fun to actually be able to do all of that. There's other stuff out there. There's a lot of indie authors, John Nassari, and there's Claire North. If you haven't read Claire North's work, definitely have a look in there. For Witcher fans, I would say go to the House of Games as a start with Claire. But I mean, all her books are fantastic. The first 15 Lives of Harry August is just genius.
Thanks. And David, anything you'd recommend for listeners of Breakfast in Beauclair?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely echo what Peter said. If you know for sure you're a Witcher fan and a fan of that universe and you love Andrzej's writing, definitely go for the Hussite Trilogy. There's a lot of it. There's 3 chunky books, the big trilogy, and it takes you on an adventure that's completely different than The Witcher. Definitely worth diving into, and you'll sort of discover a whole new world and new aspects to Andrzej's writing that you haven't come across before. So yeah, definitely that.
On that note, that is going to be it for our show today. David, Peter, thank you both so much for joining us for this episode, and thank you to our Hansa for listening. So where can people find you both on the internet? And is there anything that our community can help you with or anything that you would like to share with them?
You can check me out, and I'm on Facebook, and I'm still on X, I'm afraid. To be honest, actually, you can email me. I don't mind people having my email address out there. If people have got questions, they can ask me. So it's peter@peterkenny.com. And so if you've got questions, knock yourselves out.
And David?
I mean, I am on Facebook and on Instagram. I can't even remember what I'm called on Instagram. But yeah.
That's okay.
If any of the Hansa and your listeners would like to contact me and, discuss any issues or ask me any questions, I mean, that'd be lovely. I'd love some interaction with readers and fans. Yeah. I just wanted to say that I'm grateful that you invited me, and I've really enjoyed having this 3-way discussion. It's the first kind of English language discussion about The Witcher I've had quite a few
Oh, really?
in Poland, even though the Polish people I talk to haven't read necessarily the translations. So thank you very much again.
That can't be true. That's totally floored me. I mean, I was floored when Peter and Doug last time were just like, yeah, we've never met. You're the person introducing us. I was like, what do you mean I'm the person introducing you? That was delightful.
Well, I think David and I have never actually met in the flesh. We've chatted on the phone, but we've never actually physically met.
Yeah.
We were hoping to do this in Brighton, but it didn't come off. So
yeah.
Thank you very much for hosting us.
Peter, admittedly, when I went to the Breakfast in Beauclair listeners, I was like, guys, I'm going to have Peter and David on the podcast. Peter invited himself and is bringing David, and I just don't know what to do. And I was very excited that you reached out to me and that you were like, hey, I told David about your podcast. I was like, oh my God. It was very nice. And thank you for thinking of me when things fell through in Brighton. I was very excited.
Great. Good. I hope your listeners will enjoy what we've had to say and continue their love for Angers' work.
Join us for all new episodes of Breakfast in Beauclair when we return for Season 9 on Thursday, July 2nd, 2026. Thanks for joining us at the Breakfast Table. For show notes, transcripts of each episode, and complete list of our social platforms and listening services, head over to breakfastinbeauclair.com. Breakfast in Beauclair is created by Alyssa from Good Morning. It's hosted by Alyssa. The show is edited by Alyssa and Caleb Byes, with music by Alex Berner. Breakfast in Beauclair is produced by Alyssa in New York City, with Louise of Covier, Katie the Redhead of Toussaint, Jake B. Sharp from Edinburgh Glamry, The Original Roach, Red Kite, Libby, John of Rivia, Tom from Australia, Jill Kate the Tabby Witch, James Carson III, Miriam of Tamaria, Softy, Lisa C, Sidna, Kitty, and Jimmy from the UK. Special thanks to David and Peter for joining us for this episode, and our international Hansa for their support.